Hello and welcome to the Cardiovascular System Part 3 with M.Hook. Here we're going to go through an ECG reading of a heartbeat. So we're going to look at the different peaks, the different electrical signals getting sent through the heart, and what they indicate. So there are three waves, these three peaks that go each heartbeat. First you've got the P wave, then the QRS complex, then the T wave. And this goes along with how the heartbeat spreads. So it starts out in your pacemaker cells, and those start to depolarize and spread through the atria. So that's your P wave. Then there's a pause as the atria contract, the ventricles fill, and then the QRS complex is a couple different things happening at once. It's the atria, which are done contracting, now repolarize, and the ventricles get the signal and they depolarize. And then there's a pause while they contract. And then the T wave at the end is the ventricles repolarizing after they're done contracting. Then we've got a break, a relaxation period until the next heartbeat. Okay, so let's go through this part by part. So yellow shows the heart depolarizing. When a part is yellow and depolarized, it contracts. So first we've got our P wave, the atria depolarize, P wave. And then that electrical signal pauses at the AV node. Remember, we've got less gap junctions here. We're going down, we're merging traffic together. It slows down. That gives time for the ventricles to fill. If there wasn't this pause, the ventricles would contract too soon, and they wouldn't pump much blood through at all. It would be very inefficient. Okay. So now our atria have depolarized in our P wave. We add the pause, and now the atria are repolarizing. They're done. And the signal is just spreading to the ventricles who depolarize. This gives us the QRS. And that is just looking at the overall summation of what is happening in the heart at one time. Now the ventricles are contracting, and there's a pause as they contract. And then once it's done contracting, these cells repolarize, they get reset. And that's your T wave. Then you've got a final pause as we're waiting for the heartbeat to start again. Sometimes you can look at intervals where you're looking at like the time between the atria depolarize and they repolarize, or the time from when the atria depolarize to when the ventricles depolarize. That can be really useful information, but we're not going to go in depth on it here. So these are readings from a heart, well, from different hearts, and based on their ECG, you can tell a lot about what's happening in the heart. So this one is a normal sinus rhythm, normal heartbeats. Each time we've got the QRS, T, P, QRS, T rhythm. Here at this junctional one, the SA node isn't functioning, so now we don't have a P wave. The AV node does depolarize, just like the pacemaker cells of the SA node, but they do it slower. So you'll have this depressed heart rate, and you'll have no P wave. Second degree heart block there, you're not having all the P waves going through to the QRS. And this is ventricular fibrillation. Here's that's VFib. So these signals are going erratically. The ventricles aren't having time to fill. Oftentimes after VFib, you'll see the heart rate stop and have a flat line, and then you'll shock them to get them going again. So each heartbeat, we have that electrical signal sent, and we hear two sounds. We hear the lub-dub of the heartbeat. Those sounds are our valves closing. The first valves that are open are our AV valves, as our atria are contracting and our ventricles are filling. Once the atria relax and the ventricles contract, the AV valves snap shut. That's the lub. And then second, we open the semilunar valves when the ventricles contract so we can push blood out into the arteries. And then once the ventricles relax, the semilunar valves slam shut so that blood can't go back into the ventricle. anytime you have any sort of abnormal, irregular sounds, that's going to be indicative of valve problems. That's a heart murmur. Now let's talk about the pressure that's in your heart and your vessels through the different parts of the cardiac cycle. We have words for the different events going on in the heart. Systole or systolic is when a portion is contracting. So like the ventricles, when they're contracted, that's systolic. They're squeezing, they're contracted. Diastolic is the relaxed phase where they're not contracting. We'll look into more of this with blood pressure in the next chapter. Now we're going to talk about cardiac output. There's a really nice animation to go along with cardiac output. What cardiac output, CO, is it's how much blood is pumped through each ventricle in a minute. So that has to do with two things. First, your heart rate. How many times are you pumping blood through the heart? Second, the stroke volume. Each time your heart beats, how much blood is getting pumped out. So the cardiac output is the heart rate times the stroke volume. If you increase your heart rate, or the amount of blood you move through each beat, your cardiac output increases. So here's an example calculating your cardiac output at rest. If your heart rate at rest is 75 beats per minute, and each time you beat, you're pushing 70 milliliters of blood through the heart, your cardiac output is 5.25 liters. So to put that number in perspective, you've got women between 4 and 5 liters of blood, men generally between 5 and 6 liters. So that's almost your whole volume of blood that you're pumping through the heart each minute. And your cardiac reserve is how much more you can pump out compared to resting. So how much maximally can you push out? Basically, it's taking this 5.25 and seeing if we raised our heart rate up and our stroke volume, what the maximum amount is. Generally, as you age, your cardiac reserve is going to go down. So heart rate is pretty easy to understand. Our nervous system can help regulate when our pacemaker cells depolarize, how easy it is for them to do that. Let's look at stroke volume and how we can change the amount of blood getting sent out through each ventricle. We're going to look at three factors. First, preload, getting blood in. Contractility, the cardiac muscle contracting. And afterload, pushing blood out. So first, preload, that's filling the ventricles, getting blood in. A couple things that increase that. Slow heartbeat. That might seem kind of surprising, but when your heart is beating slower, that gives the ventricles more time to fill. So more time to fill means they can send out more blood. And also exercise. So when you exercise, when you're moving, that skeletal muscle helps us push blood back to the heart. And if we have more blood coming back, we can load our heart better. And that's going to be important for our next step with contraction. The more blood we get into our ventricles, the more fill they get. The more cross bridges we can form with actin and myosin and shorten our sarcomeres better. Okay. So next, contractility, the strength of the contraction. If you form more cross bridges, you have a stronger contraction, you're able to send out more blood. Another way you can increase contractility is to increase the amount of calcium. Calcium is important for contraction of our muscles. There's a block between the proteins actin and myosin, and they can't contract, they can't bind together, shorten the length of the muscle until calcium removes a block. So the more calcium, the easier that block is to remove. And last, afterload. So this is pushing blood out. You've got blood sitting in your aorta and your pulmonary trunk, and you have to push with force enough to open up your semilunar valves and push that blood in the aorta down. So you have to overcome that pressure there before you can push more blood out of the ventricles. One thing that increases the amount of pressure in your aorta, for example, and pushing back on your heart is hypertension. High blood pressure is going to mean that we have to create a greater force with our ventricle to push blood out, eject it from the heart. Our nervous system can alter our cardiac output. Our nervous system has the autonomic nervous system as one of its branches. Auto is self-run, so autonomic self-run. That is our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. The fight or flight, rest and digest. So during sympathetic or fight or flight, anytime you have these emotional, physical stressors, your adrenaline gets going, norepinephrine is released, and that causes our pacemaker cells to fire more quickly. So we increase our heart rate, and we also increase our contractility. So when the ventricles squeeze, that increases as well. So the pacemaker's firing more rapidly increases our heart rate. The contractility increasing increases our stroke volume. So both of these together increase our cardiac output. Whereas the parasympathetic, the rest or digest, opposes the sympathetic. So that's going to decrease our heart rate. At rest, it's called the vagal tone because the vagus nerve is what sends information down. And that would be like our resting heart rate. Homeostatic imbalances. Okay, so hyper and hypo. Calcemia. Hypo is low, calcemia is calcium. So if you don't have enough calcium, you won't be able to contract your heart as well. If you have a lot of calcium, high levels, that increases your heart rate and contraction. And then hyperkalemia and hypokalemia, high potassium, low potassium. Hyperkalemia, if you have a lot of potassium, what happens is that your cells there are more positively charged. They're less negative. That means that the pacemaker cells are basically firing really rapidly. It's really easy for them to depolarize. And that can lead to VFib, cardiac arrest. One of the ways for lethal injection would be to give large levels of potassium to stop the inmate's heart. And hypokalemia, low calcium levels. So there, our heart muscle cells would be very negatively charged. It'd be really hard to depolarize the cell, so our heartbeat would be really weak and possibly erratic. Other factors that influence our heart rate: age. Small things usually have a faster heart rate. Birds are much faster than whales, for example, to go really extreme. So the fetus, high metabolic rate, lots of growth, has a high heart rate. Females on average have faster heart rates than males. As you exercise, your heart rate increases, as does if you're stressed. And then body temperature increases your heart rate. Okay. Congestive heart failure is when you have a really low cardiac output and you can't get your tissues enough oxygen, you can't remove wastes. So what happens is your heart has to work harder. So your muscle layer gets really thick, but then as it gets too thick, the space in there is too small, and so the myocardium becomes weaker, becomes kind of flabby. So why it would have to do that? One, if you've got lots of clogged arteries, these plaque building up, the heart's going to have to push faster, harder to push through there. As well as the same idea with high blood pressure. Your afterload is going to be really high. Your ventricles are going to work really hard to push blood out each time it pumps. And then last, if you have lots of myocardial infarcts, lots of heart attacks, your cardiac muscle gets replaced with fibrous scar tissue, and then you're no longer able to contract properly. And here's a heart transplant, and you can see how they'll stitch the new heart in at the different vessels leading in and out of the heart. Another homeostatic imbalance is when you have congestion or buildup of blood in part of your body. So basically, whichever side fails is going to cause a pooling up behind it. So if your left side of your heart going to your body fails, you're not going to be picking up the blood from the lungs very quickly. So that would be pulmonary congestion. Whereas peripheral congestion would be if your right side is failing. So you're not able to take the blood from the body into the right side of the heart to the lungs, so your blood pools in the body. You'll have swelling, edema. And ultimately, one side being weakened is going to weaken the other. Tachycardia, high heart rate. Bradycardia, low heart rate. Usually okay, usually healthy. Things that change as you age: your valves thicken, Your cardiac reserves decreases, scar tissue forms, and